Hello and welcome to the Fundamentals of Lute Playing. My name is Laudon Schuett, and today we're going to talk about basic tuning. This is going to be for your beginning lute student, somebody who just got their lute in the mail, or they just bought it from their luthier and they're home and they don't remember how to tune it. I will create a more advanced video on tuning. With tuning on the lute comes all sorts of complexities, talking about things like mean tone tuning, Pythagorean tuning, moving the frets around for different keys and things like that. I'm not going to talk about that in this video. This is really going to be what notes the strings need to be, how to maybe use an electronic tuner to check your tuning and get going. For those of you who are looking for a more in-depth description of tuning and all of that, I'm going to include two links to some videos I made a few years back with my duo Bedlam. And then in the future, I will make an updated, more advanced tuning video. So if you're a lute player who already knows how to basically tune your lute and you're here looking for temperament instructions, hold on, that'll come later, or follow the links that are in the description. I'm also going to be including some very useful links to change strings and a few other maintenance things in the description to kind of help students who are right at the beginning and who have questions that may not be covered by this video. I have plans on doing a lute maintenance video in the future, but all of these things kind of need to take time. So for those of you who are eager to get going, I'll have those links in there so that you can use them. It's very, very common for people to ask, well, how is a lute tuned? If you have your lute at home and you just bought it from a luthier, or you renting it from the Lute Society of America or another lute society, or maybe the luthier mailed it to you, the first thing that would be really, really useful is to make sure you know what pitch level the lute needs to be tuned at. And you can ask the luthier, you can ask the previous owner what that is. And pitch level is just how high or low your lute is going to be tuned. Now, standard pitch today is the A, which would be this note, or this note. It's tuned at A 440. 440 is just the number of vibrations per second, and obviously different A's have different vibrations. We'll go into that in greater detail. But if you buy an electronic tuner, it'll almost certainly be set at 440. And that's certainly a great place for Renaissance lutes to be. But if you purchased a larger lute, or a lute that's supposed to be tuned down a little bit, you may want to know that. So make sure that your lute is okay at 440. If you're not sure, I think what you'll then want to do is either get in touch with somebody who's a little more experienced, or be okay with the fact that you might break a string. And you may want to be in touch with your string supplier about what would be appropriate for the string length of your instrument. So let's talk about the pitches here. Our first string, our chanterelle, is going to be a G. Our second course, the two strings, are going to be Ds. And these are tuned in unison. Unison meaning that they're the exact same pitch. Your third course is going to be A. Again, unison, so they're both exactly the same pitch. Your fourth course is where things get a little interesting. Right now I just switched to unisons. Just put a new string on there. But it's also very common, especially if you're playing early repertoire, to have an octave. And the octave is just the next version of that note up. So for example, here's my fifth course, C, with what we call the fundamental, the lower note, and then the octave. So we have the low version of C and the high version of C. We play those together. You might wonder, well, why do we have octaves on these bass notes? Well, when you don't, especially the very low bass notes, when you don't have those octaves, it can be very dull. So it's nice to sprinkle in a little more clarity, a little bit of those higher overtones. Just get that kind of fuller, richer sound. The same is going to be true for the sixth course, which is a G. Now, I know sometimes students have a hard time memorizing the names of their strings, especially their open strings, and I think it's really an important thing to do. If you've been playing for a while and you don't know the names of your open strings, I would definitely sit down for an afternoon and make sure you've got it. You really only have to remember 4 notes, because if you think about it, you've got high G, low G, so it's a G sandwich. And then the ingredients in the middle are C, F, A, and D. So C, F, A, and D. So get those memorized as soon as you can. And let's talk about some things that might arise when you first begin to tune. Now, let's say you contact your luthier, and the luthier says, well, it should be tuned at 415. Now, if there's anybody watching this and they have perfect pitch, you may have realized that this lute is not tuned at 440. This is actually a half step down at 415. So if you've got your little electronic tuner, turn it on, and there are usually some arrows, and they'll say something like calibrate on them. And if you start hitting the arrows, you'll notice that the 440 will change to 441. All you have to do is knock that down to 415, and then leave it there, if your lute needs to be tuned at 415. And there are some lutes that need to be tuned at 392, which is quite low. Not all electronic tuners will be able to go that low on their calibration. So what you do then is you just set it to 440 and you tune everything a note down. So what I mean by that is, if your luthier tells you, oh, you know, you've got this Renaissance lute and you're going to need to tune it at 392, and your tuner won't go down to 392, then what you want to do is, when you're tuning, and only when you're tuning, and you're looking at your little electronic tuner, you're going to have it set to A440. You're going to pluck the G, but it's going to say F. And you're going to tune it to F. And then you're going to pluck the D, and you're going to tune it to C. And you pluck the A, you're going to tune it to G. You're going to pluck the F, you're going to tune that one to E flat. You're going to keep going down, you know, a whole step as you go. C is going to be B flat, and then finally the G is going to be F. Now, that's the only time when you need to think about that. After you turn off your tuner and you put it down, you just go back to thinking of it as G, D, A, F, C, G. Some of you may be going, well, I don't understand. Why is it a different note, but we call it the same name? And this all stems from the fact that tuning prior, really, I mean, even today there are arguments about tuning, but there was no standard pitch at the time. They just named the note. And you'll see instructions in sources that say, well, you just tune the highest string until right before it breaks, and then you tune all the other strings with it. So it wasn't like they had these tuners to check the pitch and make sure, and they didn't even have tuning forks. They may have had a local organ to go check their instrument on, or a tuning pipe. We know there were tuning pipes and things like that, but there was no set standard. So as you went from town to town, your lute might need to adjust, particularly if you were playing with other people. But we will use the same name for each of the strings as we go. Now, there are some exceptions to this. If you've purchased a small lute, an A lute, for example, you know, the luthier may tell you, oh, this is a wonderful instrument for playing very early repertoire things like Dolce, and just has a very bright, wonderful, wonderful sound. They may say, this is an A lute. In that case, every note is going to be a pitch higher. So if you're at A440, now the luthier may tell you it's an A lute, but it's at 415. This is where things get really confusing. You're like, okay, well, okay. So I'm going to call it all these notes. Laudon's going to tell me, but it's at 415. It's not. Don't worry about it. Just do your best. Sometimes I'm like, oh man, I'll be playing with a violinist, and the violinist will be, well, here's a G, and they go, do you mean F sharp? And they go, oh yeah, I mean F sharp. So it can sometimes be confusing even to the professionals. But if you get an A lute from the luthier, they'll tell you the pitch level as well. So they'll say A 440, A lute 415. You'll set your tuner to whatever they tell you, and then you can think of this as A, E, B, G, D, Now, the vast majority of you are going to have G lutes, so it's going to be the notes that I named in the beginning. G, D, A, F, C, G. But it is important to keep in mind that there are other size lutes. The lute is not as standardized as the classical guitar, so you'll have to talk to your luthier, talk to the person you ordered the lute from, and find out what is best for that. If you've never used an electronic tuner before or you don't like it, you can also download apps. ClearTune is one that I really enjoy using, and the app will produce the pitch that you need. So you'll have to go through the app and you'll say, okay, I need an A at 415, and the device will make a sound, and then you will turn the tuning peg to match the sound. And let's talk about that for a second. I've included a link in this description for how to change strings or to make sure your strings are in the head box correctly. And that's provided for free from the Lute Society of America, a wonderful handout made from a friend of mine named Warner Ivarus. So once you've made sure that they're all in there correctly, the tuning pegs are really quite simple. They do take a little getting used to, because sometimes they get stuck or sometimes they turn too much. And the thing is not to panic. I've got a new F on here, so I'll show you my F. So if we start off with, let's say we can hear that that's out of tune. I know that the string closest to my head is in tune. I know the lower one is out of tune. That's the new string. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tuning peg, and I'm going to gently turn it. And in this case, on the top, I'm going to turn it this way. So I'm going to be going counterclockwise. And then when I'm underneath, I like having it going clockwise. Some people prefer going other ways. There's some arguments about what works best. That's just the way I've always done it, and I think most people do. So you're going to turn it until the pitch matches. This might be a struggle. And if you find that you're having trouble turning the tuning peg, it may mean that it's stuck and you need to do some tricks to get it loose. There are a couple of things you can do that I've used in the past. Things like I'll actually put ice in a bag and put it up against it to sort of shrink the tuning peg a little bit. I used that for a theorbo in an emergency once, and it worked great. It just depends on what's causing the swelling. Some people, if it's moisture, they'll take an air dryer and they'll try to heat up the area a little bit to get the moisture out. But if it gets stuck, just gently try to pull it up and out a little bit. You may pop it out and the string may go completely slack, and that's okay. You just bring it back up. Just make sure it stays in its nut groove as you're tuning. And you'll find that you may need to move around. Sometimes the pitches will be just off a tiny little bit. And one trick that I do is I actually knock it more out of tune and then slide it back up, because it's really hard to make those fine tunings. And then once you've got it in tune, just make sure that you push into the tuning peg just a little bit to make sure that it's firm and it stays in. You don't need to do this if it already feels firm. So, for example, right now, I'm really lucky. My tuning pegs are nice and they're comfortable in their slots. But let's say it wasn't. What I would want to do, knock it out of tune a little bit. Yeah, that got really loose. I kind of had to... That's what I get for messing up something that was working. So what happened, just so I can describe to you, is that my tuning peg I popped it out to demonstrate to you, what to do if it's a little loose, and it got really loose, and I kind of had to sit it back in there. There's a bit of an art to it, and you'll have to play around with it. It will be weather dependent. Sometimes it's harder to tune in the summer when everything is moist. Sometimes all your pegs are loose in the winter when you're running the AC and you're drawing all the moisture out of the air and the pegs shrink, and you open the box and all your strings have gone flat. I'm sure you've all heard a lot of jokes about tuning in the lute and how difficult it can be sometimes. But be patient, take your time, and don't be afraid to use these electronic tuners. They're really very helpful in the beginning. And if you want to work on tuning without them and gaining some independence, what you can do is use the electronic tuner for a week or two, just to kind of get the instrument in tune and make sure it's always in tune when you're playing and practicing, because you want to get that in your ear. And then what you can do is, maybe after you've gotten that under control, you can tune one string to the electronic tuner, say like your top G, and then try to tune the other strings to that top G, and see how close you can get, and check it with your electronic tuner. And we'll get into how to do that. But one basic way, which if you're a guitar player, you may be used to is the guitar players tend to tune the low string and then go up. Lute players, the descriptions are always tune the top string and then make your way down. You'll notice that when you play the 5th fret on the 2nd string, it produces the same pitch as your open 1st string. So you can tune the 2nd string or the 2nd course to your 1st string. And then when you get to the 3rd course, you can tune that 3rd course to the 2nd. And then when you get to the 4th, you'll have to make a slight adjustment. That's the 4th fret. And you'll just tune that and make sure it matches. And of course, you're always using the higher string, the string you've already done, as the reference. You're not changing that one. And then you go right back to the 5th fret for the 5th string. And when you get down here, likely you'll have to tune your octaves. So just remember that the thinner string needs to be an octave higher. And then we get down to the 6th course. That also is on the 5th fret. So just remember, if you're trying to tune it just by ear, you've spent some time already tuning with with an electronic tuner. So you've got the sound kind of in your ear, but you're just working on that. Start with tuning your high G, and then tune your 2nd course on the 5th fret to the high G, tune your 3rd course to the 2nd course, tune your 4th, which is going to be on the 4th fret instead of the 5th, because we need that A here, so F, G, A, or F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. It's just the way it lands, so you're going to use that 4th fret to play open A. And then for your 5th course, back to the 5th fret, 6th course, back to the 5th fret. There you go. If you're really struggling with tuning, you're an absolute beginner, you've never played a plucked stringed instrument, it's really helpful to contact the luthier, to have a friend show you how to do it. Even a friend who's a guitar player, just make sure if they're a guitar player that they know which notes you need to tune to, and they can take you through it. And make sure they know that they need to use the 4th fret of the 4th course, because the guitar players are going to be used to actually doing that on the 3rd string of the guitar instead. So it's a little bit different. So make sure, you can even show them this video and say, hey, watch this video, can you help me tune? I am going to include some free resources in the description to help with tuning in the description. That way, if you need some supplementary material, I know it's really scary in the beginning. You've had this instrument in your home for maybe a day or two. It's not in tune. You don't know how to get it in tune. Things are a little messy in the beginning, but you'll slowly work it out and get more comfortable with it. There are some other tuning methods by ear. For example, if you have a piano at home, as long as the piano is in tune, you can pick out a G and then play a G, as long as your instrument is at 440. If your instrument is not at A equals 440, if you're an inexperienced musician and you don't know how to transpose, you may want to avoid doing that and stick to the electronic tuner where you can adjust the tuning. If anyone has any questions, throw them up in the comments. I imagine things that I'm not expecting may pop up. I've been tuning for a really long time, since I was like 10 or 11, so some things just don't occur to me to mention. I will make a more advanced video on tuning down the road that covers temperaments and how to play around with different tuning systems on the lute. But today is just to help the beginner out. So I hope you all find this helpful. If you didn't, put a comment in the video and maybe I can fill in the gaps that you need. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you for the next lesson.